My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a junior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. I'd only been in the role for 3 months, still navigating the labyrinthine spreadsheets and the polite but firm culture of corporate finance, when the moment arrived. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, the same scratched oak surface where I'd done countless homework assignments, and where I'd once pored over college brochures. My father, Robert, slid a printed spreadsheet across the worn laminate, his finger tapping a cell highlighted in bright yellow. "Sarah," he began, his voice calm, almost instructional, "we've discussed this. Now that you're earning a professional salary, it's time to contribute properly. 40%, starting with your next check." My mother, Eleanor, sat beside him, her hands clasped on the table, offering a silent, unwavering agreement. 40%. It wasn't a request, it was a declaration. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. I managed a weak smile, my eyes scanning the carefully calculated figures, each one a neat, undeniable assault on my financial independence. They had even factored in my annual bonus, projected quarterly. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but years of conditioning held me captive. I simply nodded, a silent promise forming in my mind. This time, they wouldn't win. They had taken what was mine before, but this time, I was ready. To understand how I found myself at that table, staring down a demand that felt like a financial amputation, you need to know about the locket. My grandmother, Nana Rose, gave it to me on my 10th birthday. It was a small oval silver locket, unadorned, meant to be opened and filled with a tiny photo or a folded wish. Nana told me it was for my dreams, a place to keep them safe. My parents, however, always saw it differently. "Dreams don't pay the bills, Sarah," my father would say, his gaze sweeping over our perpetually slightly too small house, always in need of a repair we couldn't quite afford. "You need to be practical." Practicality was the family mantra, especially when it came to money. My parents weren't malicious, not in the way a cartoon villain is. They were simply self-centered, with a talent for framing their needs as universal family obligations. My father worked in sales, my mother part-time in retail, and money was always tight, a constant, low hum of anxiety in our home. From a young age, I was taught that every dollar had a purpose, and that purpose was usually to keep the household afloat. My allowance, when I got one, often disappeared into the family fund for an unexpected car repair or a sudden utility bill. I learned to work for what I wanted, starting with babysitting at 12, then retail jobs through high school. My dream, the one I kept tucked away in my metaphorical locket, was to go to college. To study finance, to understand money, and to never feel that pervasive anxiety again. I worked every summer, every weekend, saving every penny. I opened a savings account, a passbook account, the kind where you could watch the numbers grow line by line. It was my pride and joy. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had accumulated just over $15,000. It wasn't enough for a full ride, but it was a substantial down payment on my education, enough to significantly reduce my loan burden. A few months before college applications were due, my parents sat me down. "Sarah," my father said, "we're so proud of how hard you've worked. That money you've saved, it's truly impressive." My mother nodded, smiling. "But honey, having all that cash in a basic savings account, it's not smart. We could put it into a joint account, a high-yield one, for better interest rates. And it would make tuition payments so much easier to manage when the time comes." They painted a picture of financial savvy, of them helping me make my hard-earned money work smarter. I hesitated, a small voice of caution whispering in my ear, but their combined enthusiasm, their rare praise, was intoxicating. I agreed. We went to the bank, and I signed the papers, watching my precious $15,000 disappear into an account with both our names on it. They promised it was safe, my money, just managed better. What I didn't understand yet was how quickly their definition of safe could change. 6 months later, with acceptance letters arriving and tuition deadlines looming, I asked my father to transfer some funds for my first deposit. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. About that, Sarah, he began, glancing at my mother. We had a bit of an emergency. The roof needed urgent repairs, the car broke down again, and your mother had some unexpected medical bills. No receipts, no detailed explanations, just a vague, sweeping narrative of unavoidable disaster. It was for the family, honey. You understand. We had to use it. My stomach dropped. I felt a cold dread spread through me as he confessed the account was almost empty. They had used nearly all of it. My tuition money. The money I had meticulously saved, dollar by dollar, job by job. Don't worry, my mother interjected, seeing the shock on my face. You're smart, Sarah. You'll get scholarships. You'll take out loans. Everyone does. They genuinely seemed to believe it was a minor inconvenience, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the family. My dreams, the ones I had worked so hard for, suddenly felt incredibly fragile. I ended up taking out substantial student loans, working 2 part-time jobs all through college, and graduating with a debt burden that felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. Every dollar I earned, every hour I studied, was shadowed by the knowledge that my parents had taken my future security. Even during college, the pattern continued. My parents would call, usually around the end of the month, with a new urgent need. A bill was overdue, a repair was needed, or they simply needed a little help to tide them over until payday. I'd send what I could from my meager earnings, always with the understanding that it was a loan, always with the promise of repayment that never materialized. They'd complain about my student loans, implying I was irresponsible for taking on so much debt, completely ignoring the fact that their actions had forced my hand. Visits home felt less like family gatherings and more like interrogations about my future earning potential. Once you graduate, Sarah, you'll be able to help out properly, my father would say, a hopeful gleam in his eye, as if my degree was solely for their benefit. When I finally landed the junior financial analyst position, I felt a surge of exhilaration. This was it. My escape. My chance to build the life I wanted, to finally pay down those loans and secure my own future. My parents, of course, were thrilled, but their excitement was clearly rooted in what my new salary could do for them. Within weeks of starting, the contribution talks began. Initially, it was a softer approach. You're living at home, Sarah, my mother would gently remind me. It's only fair you contribute a little. I agreed to 10% of my net pay, thinking it was a reasonable amount, a temporary measure to build goodwill, to show them I wasn't ungrateful. I hoped that if I showed them I was responsible, they would finally respect my boundaries. That detail mattered later. For a few months, I dutifully transferred the money. But the demands didn't stop. The 10% was never quite enough. There was always another emergency, another bill. The requests for additional funds, always framed as a loan, grew more frequent. I found myself making excuses at work, telling colleagues I couldn't join them for lunch or after-work drinks because I was saving up. The truth was, I was funneling money into a bottomless pit. My training as a financial analyst, the very skill I had worked so hard to acquire, started to kick in. I began to look at my parents' finances more objectively, discreetly. I noticed patterns in their spending habits that didn't align with their constant claims of hardship. Their emergencies often coincided with new gadgets, small home improvements they wanted, or dining out. It wasn't true destitution, it was poor financial management, coupled with a deep-seated sense of entitlement. The 40% demand was the final, undeniable straw. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. It was designed to keep me dependent, to prevent me from saving, from paying down my loans, from ever truly leaving their orbit. I recognized it then, clear as day, they didn't want me to succeed independently. They wanted me to be their perpetual safety net, their personal ATM. The silver locket, once a symbol of my dreams, now felt like a heavy, empty weight around my neck, a reminder of everything they had taken. The recognition was painful, but it also brought a cold clarity. I stopped making excuses for them, even in my own head. My first step was to secure my own finances. The very next day, I went to my bank and opened a completely new checking and savings account, one that my parents had no knowledge of and no access to. I changed my direct deposit immediately, ensuring my next paycheck would go solely into my new account. Then, I started documenting everything. I kept copies of my pay stubs, my student loan statements, and any texts or emails where they made their demands. I even started a quiet log of their spending habits, just for my own clarity, noting the dates of their emergencies and what purchases followed. I also sought advice, not from family, but from a trusted mentor at work, Maria, a senior analyst who had a reputation for being shrewd and fair. I vaguely explained my family situation, without going into excessive detail, focusing on the financial demands. Maria listened carefully, her expression unreadable. "Sarah," she said, leaning forward, "your first priority has to be your own financial stability. No one else will look out for it if you don't. Set your boundaries, and stick to them. It will be hard, but it will be worth it." Her words gave me courage. I also did some research, finding articles on financial abuse and healthy family contributions. 40% was not merely high, it was exorbitant for a young professional trying to establish herself. A week after the 40% demand, I went back to their house. The same kitchen table, the same scratched oak. My father was flipping through a magazine, my mother was tidying up. They looked at me expectantly, assuming I was there to confirm my compliance. I took a deep breath, clutching the strap of my bag, where my carefully compiled documents lay. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "About the 40% contribution. I can't do it." My father lowered his magazine, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, you can't do it? We discussed this. It's only fair." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's not fair. 40% is not a contribution, it's a takeover. And after you took my college savings, I can't trust you with my financial future anymore." Their faces changed. My mother's jaw dropped slightly, and my father's eyes narrowed. "Took your savings?" "Sarah, that was for the family. We had an emergency," he protested, his voice rising. "An emergency that meant I had to take out tens of thousands in student loans," I countered, pulling out a printout of my current loan balance. Loans I'm still paying interest on every single month. Loans I could have avoided if my money had been where you promised it would be. I laid the printout on the table. "I've moved my direct deposit to a new account that only I have access to. I've also found an apartment with a roommate, and I'll be moving out at the end of the month." My mother started to cry, a soft, manipulative sound. "After everything we've done for you, Sarah. The sacrifices we made. Is this how you repay us? You're so selfish." "I'm not selfish, Mom," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm protecting myself. I will contribute a reasonable amount for the utilities for the next 2 weeks until I move out. After that, my priority is paying down my loans and building my own savings. I will not be giving you 40% of my paycheck, or any percentage that jeopardizes my financial future." The confrontation was exactly as ugly as I had anticipated. My parents raged, they guilt-tripped, they accused me of being ungrateful, cold, and abandoning them. My father called me a cold-hearted accountant, a label I almost found amusing in its irony. They tried to enlist other relatives, painting me as the villain who had turned her back on her struggling parents. Some relatives, knowing my parents' history, offered hesitant support, or at least stayed neutral. Others, unfortunately, bought into the narrative, making holiday gatherings strained and awkward. But I held firm. I moved out 2 weeks later, into a small but bright apartment with a friendly roommate. The first few months were challenging, adjusting to new expenses and living independently, but the sense of freedom was exhilarating. I immediately started aggressively paying down my student loans, channeling the money I would have given my parents into my own debt. Watching that balance shrink, month after month, was more satisfying than any praise I had ever received from them. The cold knot in my stomach began to unravel. The relationship with my parents became, and remains, distant. They still occasionally send texts hinting at financial hardship, but I respond with polite but firm boundaries, offering emotional support if they need it, but no longer financial. The silver locket, the one Nana Rose gave me, now sits on my desk, a small, polished reminder. I don't keep it closed anymore. I've filled it, not with a photograph, but with a tiny, folded slip of paper. On it, in my own neat handwriting, are 3 words: my future. My choice.